to the Hope for the Animals podcast, a project of compassionate living. I'm your host, Hope Bohannic, and you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. Please share a post of your favorite episode with your networks. Today on the podcast, we have Stephen Rouk. He is the founder of Connect for Animals, and we had a great conversation about getting active in vegan advocacy and the many ways that one can do that. We also talked about social network theory, and I encourage you to stick around for that because it was really interesting about how we spread information as a society. We get into that about halfway through the episode. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about my own activism and my effectiveness and the complexity that I've seen in the animal advocacy movement in terms of different ways to organize. I have an interesting perspective of having done this work for 30 years. And I remember when all we had was a telephone tree. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it was long before the internet. And we would have this list of people in this kind of tree formation. And I would come home after work and I'd call my 10 people, right? And then they had 10 people that they would call. And then those people had more people to call. And that's how we could reach 100 people or 500 people with the information, right? But by the last branches of the tree, the date of the meeting would be different or the time of the event would be off, and inevitably one person wouldn't make their calls, so we would lose that whole branch. And people would show up to the event an hour late and they'd say, but that's what they told me on the call. Oh, yeah. So certainly not the most effective method, but it's all we had till the amazing invention of email. What a game changer that was. And now our online organizational structures are so much better for communication and organizing. Anyway, a little a little story of how we had to go uphill both ways to the schoolhouse in the snow using phone trees. But coming home now from organizing the Sonoma County Veg Fest, I recently did the Sonoma County Veg Fest with Compassionate Living. We are the sponsoring organization, the hosting organization. I'm the main organizer, and I talked about this on our last episode. I've been thinking a lot about online versus in-person activism. Since the pandemic moved all my work online for the last few years, including this podcast, I've been so excited about the numbers, right? Like the downloads and the shares and these big numbers. And I've been reaching so many more people with this podcast, with our webinars, than I ever did before with in-person events. But the Veg Fest was so visceral. When you have someone coming to an event, having face-to-face conversations, eating the food, feeling the vibe, that might not be as quantifiable, like you're not reaching as many people possibly, but the quality, I think, of the experience might be more enhanced than an online experience. It's much more immersive, right? And internalizing it in a way, internalizing the issue or veganism in a way that's deeper, I think, than just reading an article or watching a video online, more formational to someone's identity, right? I think that maybe an in-person event could change someone on a deeper level, reaching that who we are kind of transformation, not just what we do. I've talked about the importance of this on the podcast before, how changing who we are on a fundamental level, becoming compassionate, ethical vegans, and not just changing our habits. We don't just eat vegan food. We are compassionate vegan people. And that, I think, makes the change more sustainable. When your identity is transformed and there's a community behind you. And we'll be talking about that coming up with our guest, Stephen. But that's what I think a Veg Fest does. Turning on your computer, watching a webinar for an hour, I think it could be a more superficial experience than getting in the car, driving somewhere, meeting up with friends, spending the day seeing and smelling and touching and feeling the environment around you. It's a three-dimensional real world interaction with the issue. Such an important aspect, I think, and kind of like a continuation of the online interaction, right? So your first or your second, third, fifth interaction with veganism might be online, but then to be able to go to an event with so much stimulation like a veg fest, I think that could maybe cement the idea and the identity in a more comprehensive and complex way. It's interaction using all the senses. I feel like it's essential to generating lasting social change, having that real world community connection. And our Veg Fest in Sonoma County, it's definitely an older crowd. It's an older demographic county anyway. It seems like older folks are often seen as not who we should be reaching out to, that we should focus on younger people as they have more of a lifetime to be, to make compassionate purchases, and they're not as set in their ways. But elders are really influential in their communities, right? They're the heads of families, leaders in the community. They're the volunteers. They are the ones cooking the Thanksgiving dinner. When we were talking about it, when I was kind of lamenting the older demographic of the Veg Fest, Kojin, my husband, pointed out that his sisters were vegetarian. One was vegan and the other was vegetarian, but he knows that it was his mother's influence that got them eating meat again. Every time they got together, they were very close, and it was just it chipped away at their vegetarianism, and now they eat meat again. So the influence of elders is real. They affect their networks, they affect their families. So the question is, how much of what we do now, focusing so much online, is alienating that older population? We need to reach them with these in-person events, right? So I think my conclusion is that online activism, you get big numbers, you get a quantifiable system of numbers and likes and shares. However, it could be considered more of an impersonal surface experience. But with an in-person event, you get a quality of experience that can't necessarily be quantified. It may be deeper, more transformational. And this is all theoretical. I don't know, if this is true. This is all just, my feelings about it right now. We certainly need more statistics and studies to know. But my true conclusion, I think we need both, right? Of course, online and in person. And we shouldn't diminish the importance of in-person events in favor of online. Having done both, I know that in-person events are so much more work. The Veg Fest is so much work. And right after, I often say, I'll never do it again. That was the last year. But for some reason this year, it felt really impactful and uplifting. It felt like a really nice complement or extension to all the online activism that I do now. And I'm actually considering doing a Eugene Vegan Fest in our new home in Eugene, Oregon. There isn't a Veg Fest here, and I'm blessed with the ability to do that kind of large scale organizing, even though I know how much work it is. But it feels like it would be really a fantastic and effective thing for me and Compassionate Living to do another one of these big Veg Fests. So I'm weighing that and considering that. But I'll certainly continue the Sonoma County Veg Fest. It was a really good year and felt really significant. So let's dig in more to building vegan community with our guest today. I hope you enjoy it. All right, today I am happy to introduce Stephen Rouk. He is the founder of Connect for Animals, a platform for people who want to help end animal farming. He's been in the animal advocacy movement for the last decade, working on data analysis, strategy, community building, and grassroots activism. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Thank you, Hope. It's such a pleasure to be here. So excited to talk.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to talk to you. So, Stephen, we love to start with hearing about your vegan origin story. I am always fascinated by people's vegan origin story and what got them to go vegan, when they went vegan. So, let us know when and why did you go vegan?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. So it took a long time. So I don't have a date because I feel like it was a period of, like 5 years or something like that from first exposure to finally going vegan and staying vegan and being someone who would call myself vegan, right? It was this long, slow trajectory. And so it started. Yeah, I'm not even entirely sure when it started, but at some point I remember, being exposed to animal cruelty footage of what happens on farms. And I think like lots of other people, it blew my mind. It rocked my world that this kind of thing was happening just because I had never made the connection, never really thought about it. It's like, oh, okay, we eat meat, but where does that come from? And right, the typical story that you hear from a lot of different people. My story is part of what inspired my work with Connect for Animals is that I didn't have anybody else really who was doing this other than my sister for a little while. And so it took me a very long time. And I tried going vegetarian at one point, I think maybe late high school or early college, and then I, sort of fell off because I just didn't know anybody. And, that social pressure, I guess eventually just got me to flip back to the norm. And then I would see another video or I'd see another documentary. Like I remember watching the documentary Food Inc. at some point during college and getting reminded of this whole space, right? That people don't really talk about. And so I tried going vegetarian again. And I think I did it for a little bit longer, and then I sort of fell back off again, right? And I think it was at some point after college when I had been grappling these questions of what do I want to do with my life? I want to have a positive impact. I want to do something that's meaningful. I want to try to be a good person, right? I think I got exposed to this space once again, and I was like, this is such a huge problem, and it's such a core part of what it seems like it should mean to be a good person in society is to reduce your contribution to suffering and cruelty and injustices, right? And I was like, I think that this is it. Like I should really be investing more in this space. I should make my actions align with these beliefs. So, I should go vegan, but even beyond that, I should try to figure out how I can make this work, my life's work, right? Because it is such a huge problem. It is such a huge issue. And if, I was trying to think, how do I live a good life? And I kept coming back to this. It's like I can't think of a better way to devote my time and energy than to trying to reframe how humans interact with other animals. So that's I mean, very kind of a long, windy answer to your question. I did want to mention though that in one of your previous podcasts, you talked about ahimsa and how that means so much to you personally. I come from more of a, I love philosophy. I've studied philosophy a bit, and in college, I, studied ethics, and I was a math major, but philosophy just for fun, basically, because I'm one of those weird people. Um, and then when I lived in, Colorado for quite a while, I got exposed to thoughts and ethical philosophy from Buddhism and Jainism, and that includes the concept of ahimsa. I love how I feel like when you really dig into the truth of things, when you really ask that question, how do I live a good life? You see this concept pop up in Western philosophy, like in utilitarianism and all kinds of other ethical philosophies. And you also see it happening in these extremely old religious traditions like Buddhism and Jainism. And it converges on this concept of, I mean, ahimsa and nonviolence and ethical caring for other beings, right? And so these days, veganism for me is also it's just an implementation of this deep philosophy of what it means to live a good life, right? So, anyways, long, windy answer there.
No, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing how many parallels there are all over the world with the different philosophies when you dig in to ethics. And it seems so simple, just not causing harm, not causing suffering. And
Hmm.
yeah, and veganism is such a beautiful expression of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Stephen, so I invited you on because you run a website and an events list called Connect for Animals. And this is a whole project that you have created. Tell us about Connect for Animals.
Yeah, of course. Would love to. So, Connect for Animals is a platform for people who want to help animals by ending factory farming. So, our mission really is to find, connect, and empower disconnected pro animal people and get them plugged into animal advocacy in a way that feels good for them. Whatever organization might be a good fit for them, whatever strategy they might be interested in pursuing, whatever their background might be, our goal is to create a platform that just helps people get connected and contribute meaningfully to this space and, ideally stay in this space as long as possible or as long as they want to. We just want people to find a way to contribute that is a good fit for them.
Yeah.
So, like you said, the platform is focused on events for the time being, but that's really just the first step here in a long journey of adding different features to the platform, making it as useful as possible for anyone who wants to help animals, right, by ending animal farming. So right now, for example, you can go on the platform, you can find upcoming vegan events, upcoming animal rights events, other events that intersect with ending animal farming. So we list virtual events and conferences and local events across the United States for right now, but with the goal of expanding that work internationally. As soon as we can, we just want to do a good job with it. But we definitely don't want to be entirely US focused indefinitely because this is a big global movement, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
help animals. And there's a lot of amazing work happening in countries all across the world, not just the US. So yeah, so events is the first feature, and we're constantly working on what are we going to do next? How are we going to expand this platform? But that's the basic idea of it.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. And I've appreciated being able to put our events, Compassionate Living's events, on your event listing. So I
Ah,
have,
amazing.
yeah, I've been absolutely utilizing your platform. I love it. But you have kind of a theory and strategy behind this. You talked a little about it in strengthening the vegan community. Would you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, of course. So I've been in this space, in the animal advocacy space here for I guess about a decade now, more or less, in various capacities. So I started when I was talking about going vegetarian, going vegan, I was really trying to find a way to get involved and do something more than just my personal choices, right? So this is a huge problem. The question that I had was, how can I get plugged in here? How can I really make a difference? And answering that question was surprisingly difficult. With someone that has my background, my skill sets, my specific where I was living at the time, I wanted to find a way to get plugged in where I felt like I could really contribute and make a difference. And yeah, it was just hard. And so what I ended up doing was just trying to find anything that I could, right? So I found my local meetup group and started going to vegan potlucks. And there were people who would go and leaflet on the weekends at a local park. And so I got into leafleting with them. I'm trying to, just trying to find my space. And so eventually I got plugged into this kind of grassroots activism group that did more protest style stuff. But I have a background in math and data analysis and technology, right? So like none of this was really aligned with my skill sets per se. I thought that maybe I could be using those skills or something else that was more naturally aligned with the skills and the talents that I had been developing. I thought that, there should be a better way for me to get involved here. And so that journey continued, and I went to the animal rights conference and I got connected with someone at Mercy for Animals who worked on their data and research team. And I was like, oh, okay, this is closer, right? This is closer. And so when they had a data and research job come open, I applied for that and got the chance to work at Mercy for Animals doing data and research work for a couple of years. And while I was there, met so many amazing people in the space and got to work on some really cool projects. But this problem persisted, and I began to see this problem in other symptoms that we seem to face as well, right? So I think that it's hard for a lot of people to get plugged in, not just me. I think actually most people, it's challenging to figure out space for them to get plugged in a way that feels good for them. Also, and I can chat more about this later, but a lot of people who go vegetarian and vegan end up going back to eating animals, right? And I think that part of that could be a lack of social support, lack of getting plugged in. So I wasn't seeing, I basically came to see this problem of disconnection and this problem of not having a good way to coordinate, not even necessarily coordinate, but just to find out about all of the amazing work that's happening in the animal advocacy space and how that problem affects so much of the movement from, it's difficult for people to get connected and difficult for people to stay here and for people to find things that are a good fit for them. And so at some point, this seemed like a big enough gap and a big enough opportunity to help create impact here that I decided to dive in more fully, and that's really where Connect for Animals comes from, is trying to fill this gap here and just make it easier for people to exist in this space and get plugged in a way that feels good for them.
Yeah, people often think that vegan activism or animal advocacy is one thing. Like they see it as like you have to go to protests or you have to leaflet. Those are kind of the two, or like the cube of truth. That's kind of
Hmm.
the only way to do vegan activism. And that's just not the case. There's so many other ways, other aspects to the movement, and so many skills that the movement needs, right, behind the scenes and other ways. And I think that there's areas that get neglected, like the arts or creating art, or whatever it is that you are into, or like you're saying with math and data stuff. Yeah, that's really so helpful, right? I mean, we need all of that. So how does Connect for Animals kind of show that there are other ways of getting involved?
Yeah, of course. Well, it's, we're at the beginning of this journey. So a lot of what we do right now is centered around events. What we do with events, though, is we try to take events that are happening from all these amazing organizations, all these, incredible nonprofits and local groups around the United States, and tag them according to what is this event about? Who is this event going to appeal to, right?
Mm.
So is this something that's going to appeal to programmers and techies, right? Vegan Hacktivists, the organization, has lots of events like that, and they have opportunities to get involved if you are a programmer, if you are a designer, or someone who's interested in technology. If you're a writer, Sentient Media has a lot of great events focused around writing and journalism and public relations in the movement. And so we tag their events with a writing tag so that if people are interested in that kind of thing, they can go and they can find out what's happening.
Yeah.
As time goes on here, in addition to making these events more, surfacing these events to people who it's going to be a good fit for. So, for example, routing events for college students directly to the college students who we might have on the platform, or events for teachers or for parents directly to those people. So we want to do a better job with that, more intelligent recommendations. But we also want to start expanding this beyond events, right? So there is the opportunity to let people know about organizations. So, like I mentioned, vegan hacktivists or sentient media, these are organizations that sometimes have events. And so right now we're focused on getting those events and making sure that people know about them. But in the future, you can imagine someone joins the platform and there's a little quiz that says, what kinds of things are you interested in? Or what do you do for fun? Or what are your hobbies? Or what's your professional expertise? And then we can take that information and say, oh, have you heard about vegan activists? Have you heard about sentient media? If you're into alt protein, have you heard about the Good Food Institute? If you're a business leader, there's this organization called Vegan Leaders in Corporate Management. So we can route people to the right organizations that might be a good fit for them. But I guess that's a little taste of where we're hoping to go in the future and how we're hoping to help solve this.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you want to really try to connect people, connect for animals, connect people.
There you go.
That's great. To where they can plug in best, or where they can plug in and be effective and helpful according to their interests and skills. That's really exciting. Yeah.
Absolutely. And where they live too, you know, because for quite a lot of people, certainly not for everybody, but for quite a lot of people, it matters to do something that's close to you or where the people involved live close to you. You know, we are humans are very physical creatures, right? We exist in these physical environments, and it's much easier to go out and grab a coffee or a lunch with someone who lives in the same city as you. And so part of what we want to do is help people find those groups that are in their backyard as well, those animal sanctuaries, those nonprofit groups, those local meetup groups, and make sure that they have those local in-person relationships as well, in addition to the, you know, whatever sort of virtual digital connections they can have with nonprofits all over the world.
Yeah, so important, and probably part of the problem with recidivism, right? Because so many people who try to go vegan, are vegan for a little while, will go back to eating animal products. And, in the movement, we believe that one of the reasons for that, and this is a ongoing debate, and there is some precedent and studies about it, but we're still really kind of unsure. But one of the things that we suspect is that it's a lack of social support, that you don't feel supported in your community and you feel alone in your veganism, right? So that's, really an important aspect to this, trying to get support for people, right? So they will stay vegan.
Absolutely. Yeah, that recidivism, you know, I think that there are some very deep psychological and sociological reasons why this is the case. But you know, you could sum it up maybe in the single sentence, which isn't entirely true, but I think it's true enough, which is that people do what their friends and families do. You know, kind of all else being equal. And obviously, we each have our own different paths and our own different interests. But when it comes to a lot of how we live our lives, and a lot of the maybe let's say the structure of how we live our lives, like the fact that, you know, we eat, you know, I don't know, 3 meals a day, and they typically look like this, and we typically celebrate these holidays, and we do this together on the weekends. And, you know, people often just do what their friends and families do. And so what that means for us as advocates, I think that a lot of work, certainly not all of it, but a lot of work has been focused on just getting, you know, whoever to go vegan, right? Like we just sort of randomly try to convince people that animal ethics is an important issue or that animals are worthy of moral consideration. We try to convince people that, you know, going vegetarian or vegan is like a good expression of reducing your harm that you're causing to animals. And we just sort of try to convince whoever we can convince, right? And I think that, you know, one of the reasons for doing that is just because it can be hard to get people to agree to make these lifestyle switches. But I think one of the problems with just trying to convince whoever, right? And then maybe just leaving the, you know, if you do convince somebody to, like, let's say, go vegan, then just leaving them to their own devices is the fact that they are existing in that same social network, you know, in that same situation that they were in when we found them. And that means that probably everyone around them is not vegan, you know, like not even vegetarian. And there's going to be just this constant pressure from everyone that they know in overt ways, but also in subtle ways. This pressure, just constant pressure to revert back to what everybody else is doing, to eat the
Yeah.
same meal that everybody else is eating, to
Yeah.
do the same things that everybody else is doing, right? And some people can withstand that pressure for a long time. Some people can withstand it for a short amount of time. But for most people, that pressure is just it's strong. And so like after, you know, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, you know, for a lot of people it's much shorter. It's just easier to flip back to what everybody else is doing, right? And so that essentially is it's not entirely lost impact on the work that we were doing trying to reach that person in the first place, but it's quite a lot of lost impact. And, you know, we don't know the exact numbers. There was some research from several years ago that showed something like maybe 85% of people who go vegan or vegetarian end up going back to eating animals. We're not sure what the real number is, right? But either way, you could view that as being a large percentage of our impact that we're kind of just setting on fire, and that it's just like lost impact, right? And so I mean, the mission of Connect for Animals, and when I was thinking about these issues of connection and these issues of helping people get plugged in a way that feels good for them, and making sure that people know other people in this space, one of the impacts of that is reducing recidivism, because essentially you increase the amount of social support that somebody has to stay vegan and to stay caring about animals. You increase that social support, and that's going to reduce the probability of them just flipping back to whatever the social norm is. So that's just one of the impacts that we're targeting here. But that recidivism is I mean, it's a huge issue. I think not only for diet, but also for people just caring about the space in the first place, right? Like if you go to a random restaurant or a random coffee shop and you just kind of poke your head into different people's conversations, what's the probability that they're going to be talking about animal issues? Generally speaking, it's very low, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so not only diet, not only is someone going vegan, but also just what they care about. Because if everyone around you is talking about, whatever the issue of the day might be, and there are lots of very important issues out there, right, to care about. So definitely don't want to demean. I mean, people who care about climate change or racial justice, like these issues are very important of people working on them.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that, people are just going to kind of switch back to whatever the group is talking about, whether that's whatever sports, whatever book, whatever movie, whatever thing, animals kind of get just slowly excluded from the conversation. And we would love for that to not happen, right? Because this problem is so big. Animals need to be part of the conversation.
I often tell people that are new to veganism or that are just going vegan that it's critical that they find at least one other vegan to talk to. you know,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
at least one other, preferably someone in their area so that they can go out for meals together and, that they can really just have a vegan friend. Because if you don't have anyone to talk to about it, it can be very isolating because you are it is so different from the rest of the world, and you feel that you can't talk about it. You have to bite your tongue in most social circles. So I think it's really critical that we have that support of vegan friends, vegan chosen family that you can have your vegan Thanksgiving with if you need to do that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we had some very good vegan Thanksgivings with, I love a good vegan Friendsgiving.
yes.
And actually we've started doing it with my wife and I have started doing it with our families as well. Vegan Thanksgiving. It took many years to get to that point. But yeah, those, having those friends, like you said, so important.
Yeah. So, Stephen, you told me a bit about social network theory. I'd love to hear more about this. What is social network theory?
Yeah, of course. So, this kind of relates to what I was mentioning earlier about those deep psychological and social reasons for why people do what they do. And social network theory is basically just taking that question of, why do people do what they do? But as part of looking for the answer, social network theory looks at the structure of our social networks and which of your friends does what, and which of your family members does what, and how do all of those influences combine to influence you. And also, like, let's say, if you have something like veganism or any other behavior change or any type of information that maybe you want to ask the question, how does that spread through society? Well, one of the ways that you can understand that is through how does it spread through the social network of people interacting with each other, either, in person or online or whatever. All kinds of things spread from person to person, right? I mean, you could take that on the physical, literal sense of the words, sharing thing like viruses, or disease can
Right.
be spread from person to person. And that's part of social network theory as well, is studying, how do things like diseases spread. And actually, I mean, that's a good place to talk about really quickly, because sometimes we can think that everything spreads like a virus spreads, right? Like if you have an idea, like let's say veganism or animal ethics, sometimes you might think they're like, oh, I just need to tell people about it. I just need to expose them to this information once, and then they're going to get it and they're going to do it,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And then yeah, yeah, right. And then those people are going to go tell their friends, and they're going to tell their friends, and this is that idea of viral spread. You know, you could think about it in terms of an actual virus. You could think about it in terms of, let's say, going viral on social media,
Hmm.
where you spread something to somebody else and then they spread it to their friends and those friends spread it to their friends and you sort of just get this massive spread of information or behavior or whatever it might be. Now, that works for some things. And there's actually, I'm going to be pulling from this author of this book that I read. His name is Damon Centola. He wrote a few very good books, but a good book for people to check out is his book Change by Damon Centola. So he calls those things simple contagions, whether or not they're actual viruses or whether or not they're just ideas or behavior, types of behavior. So he calls those things that spread easily from person to person, simple contagions,
Hmm.
because it just takes you telling your friend or you know, in the case of an actual virus, a single cough or a single exposure, and then it's just easy to spread. Now, the problem is when we view things like animal ethics or veganism as simple contagions, because there's this whole other thing that he talks about called complex contagions. And this is where things do not spread easily from person to person. It is not just as easy as telling somebody something. And with, you know, those of us who've been doing animal advocacy or, you know, telling others about veganism for a while will know that, right? Like you can't just tell somebody once and then have them go vegan or have them care about the issue.
Yeah.
It takes quite a lot of convincing, quite a lot of information, quite a lot of social support. And the reason why is once again related to, you know, psychology and specifically the psychology of social norms and conformity. And the fact that all else being equal, humans seem to want to behave like those around them. Whether it's the mannerisms that we use or the types of language that we use or the you know the clothes that we wear, there's this pretty deeply wired psychological desire to fit in with your group, right? To fit in with the people that you're hanging out with. That's that conformity impulse there. At a society-wide level, that can lead to things like social norms, like, oh, the fact that we all eat cows and pigs and chickens, right? Or the fact that we all wear, you know, certain types of pants and dresses and shirts and, you know, our hair looks a certain way. And so that psychological desire to conform, to fit in with your people can lead to these social norms. And so essentially what, you know, the researcher Damon Centola says is if you have a behavior like veganism, for example, that challenges these social norms and that challenges that desire for us to fit in, you know, if it makes you stand out, then that behavior is going to face a lot of resistance and it's going to be really hard for somebody to switch their behavior. And so these are the things that he calls complex contagions. And to spread those essentially requires you to understand that these people are getting pressure from all around them to switch back to the social norm, to whatever society is doing. And we have to make sure that people have social support when they're going to make some of these bigger changes that might, you know, be called complex contagion so that they can overcome that opposing pressure to conform to whatever it is that society is doing, right?
Fascinating. So, like a simple contagion is something like, you know, a video on TikTok that is just humorous or fun or a dance or something like that, something that's just, you know, doesn't really challenge anything in your worldview, but is just something fun and entertaining. So that would be like a simple contagion, perhaps, but then
Yeah.
like a complex contagion is something that possibly challenges your ideology or a behavior. So you have to actually really change your perceptions or your behaviors. So that's going to be a lot more complex. It's going to bring up more resistance. And so we need more to offer more, I don't know what, support, information, all of that around complex asks, complex contagions. Interesting, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean that's exactly it, right? Is that there are certain things. So one of the examples in the book that he talks about is he talks about public health campaigns actually. And so I think that there was an example involving contraceptive usage, encouraging that in various communities. That's, contraceptive usage is kind of a touchy subject in certain communities and certain cultures. It essentially was not a simple contagion where you could just tell people like, hey, birth control is important and here are your
Yeah,
five
yeah.
options and like which one do you want to go with? And make sure that you're using it on a regular basis. And what they found was essentially that contraceptive usage in these communities was a complex contagion, and they had to, I think they had these, three, four, five different methods that they were trying to promote. And what they found was that it didn't really matter which method a community decided to go with. What mattered more was that the entire community was on the same page and that they were talking about it and that people had that mutual reinforcement, that cultural reinforcement from each other to talk about, the type of contraceptive that they're using. And with some of these public health interventions or these public health areas, you see this same thing as well, right? And or I guess in the case of COVID, maybe it's mask wearing, right? If everyone around you on the subway or everyone around you at work or in a theater is wearing a mask, there's some social pressure there to conform to that, right?
Yeah.
But if everyone is not, then there's kind of social pressure in the other direction. And
Yeah.
so I think that you saw during COVID, for example, of people asking the question is like, okay, if as a public health thing, we want people to wear masks when they're out in public, how do we change the social norm very quickly so that there is social pressure to conform to a, let's say, like a mask wearing norm, as opposed to the default, which is, if you wear a mask, maybe you look weird or people think that you're sick or whatever. So there's a social pressure to conform in the opposite direction. Yeah, so certain behaviors fall into those complex contagion categories where it's difficult or where you face social pressure versus, like you said, the TikTok video, right? Not a lot of social pressure to either share it or not share it. If you do share it and it doesn't go well, that's fine. You're just sharing a funny video or a funny dance, right? This is
Right.
like a way lower pressure, way lower bar versus something like veganism, 3 meals a day, what you're eating, where you're eating, how you talk about animals. These kinds of things are
Yeah.
very, very much complex contagions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do we do? I don't know if you have the answer or any of us have the answer to that, but if you have any thoughts, about, well, what then do you do to create that complex contagion to spread?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question. I'm definitely not going to pretend to have the answer,
Yeah, none of
right?
us do. None of us do.
Oh
And
yeah.
and no one should pretend that they do, but certainly, as as advocates,
Uh,
we have thoughts. So go ahead and please share
uh,
your thoughts. Yeah.
of course, of course. Well, so one of the big takeaways from this type of research is mutual support, social support is extremely important because so I actually gave a presentation recently at a conference where I demonstrated this with a green dot, who's like your vegan person, surrounded by their social network of red dots, right? Who are people who are, not vegan or vegetarian, don't care about animals or haven't thought about it yet.
Yeah.
And if we can just think about that picture of like your lonely little green dot surrounded by all these red dots, then I think that can help us understand the situation that we're up against here, which is the fact that that person is isolated, they are all alone, and they're facing this constant pressure. And so what are some things that we can do? Well, we can connect that person to other green dots, right? So we can give them some of that social support. I think that some of the efforts being done here around, let's say, mentorship programs that various organizations have done, or like you said earlier, that you try to convince people to meet at least one other person in their local community, right? Or two other people who they can talk with about these things, right? So really leaning into social support and asking the question, when we get someone who's on the animal side, how do we make sure that that person has support with that issue, with that position, with that life change that they're making? How do we make sure that that person isn't alone? Asking that question and tying it into all the work that we do, I think is very important. Yeah, so that's one thing that we can do.
Hmm.
Another thing that we can do, and I think this has been explored much less. Yeah, I don't know what there is here, but maybe there's something, which is rather than trying to get individuals to change their beliefs or behavior, focusing on communities or families or institutions, focusing on that higher level where a social network, a group of people are doing this together or are exposed to this information together or do a 30-day vegan challenge together. I think that that's a way that you can try to influence communities rather than individuals. Because if you can influence a community, or if you can even, part of a community, you're already part of the way towards solving the social support problem because people are going to have those relationships within the community that they can rely on, right? And lean on. The work that we're doing with Connect for Animals very much is based on some of this research as well, and just trying to get people connected to this space. So this is very much the foundation of the work that we're doing too, is increasing social support, basically just making it easier for people to stay in this space longer and to have the support and the information and the resources that they need to be here. So there's a couple ideas, but I think, the first thing that people can do is just, learn a little bit more, like go read this book, for example, Change, by Damon Centola. It's a great book. It's not too difficult to read. It's like more for the public rather than being like a research book or anything like that. So learning more about this issue is also a great way to start solving the problem because I do think it is a big gap in the movement's knowledge right now. We don't think about social networks as much as we should.
Yeah, wow. It's really fascinating. Social network theory. Yeah, I'd love to get that book and learn about it. Actually, we'll put a link to that book in the show notes in case people are interested to learn more. It's so important. It's such an important aspect of this that you're right. We don't really think about often enough. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Stephen, we do need to bring this interview to a close. So, I want to ask you our final question. What gives you hope for the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. So I consider myself someone who likes to hold hope and like realism or something in the same space. So I view myself as a very, I don't know, very skeptical, very realistic person, which sometimes, you can say like, oh, I don't know, does that leave room for hope? And I think it absolutely does. So I do have a lot of hope, and it sits with, that same space of looking at the situation as it is. So I do have hope. One of the things that I have hope for is the fact that there are so many people these days who are devoting their time and their energy to animal issues. It's only been on this planet for, a few decades, but from what I've seen, it seems like there are more people working on this full time now across the globe, full time and part time and volunteering now across the globe than there were several decades ago. And that gives me a ton of hope is just the fact that there are all of those people approaching this problem from so many different ways. That's amazing. That gives me a ton of hope. One thing that is a bit, that is a bit of a mixed bag, I think, is like technology and the internet. It's had lots of goods and bads, but I have this personal hypothesis. I don't know if it's true or not that the internet might have strapped rocket engines to the animal rights movement by letting everybody find each other and by like sharing all of this information much more widely and much more quickly. So maybe there's like a little bit of hope that modern communication technology and the internet is enabling us to work more effectively as a movement because of being able to talk with each other and make this kind of information go viral and make more people aware of animal cruelty much
Yeah.
faster
Yeah.
than previously. So that does maybe give me some hope that we've entered some sort of new age here with the internet. And then there's a lot of people trying new strategies as well. Like I love the work that Greener by Default does and Default Veg, flipping the default option. They think that that's just a beautiful strategy that seems to face much less resistance at certain institutions, for example. And so
Yeah,
I
and if people don't know, it's basically changing the menu in a cafeteria or somewhere to be all vegan, and then but people can add animal products if they want. Like that would be instead of having to ask for the vegan option, they have to ask for meat or animal products. So just so people know what that is if they
yes.
didn't. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And like, would we prefer that everything just be vegan or plant-based? Like, of course, it's a huge step. I mean, if you look at the work that, for example, I think like the New York City hospitals have done, New York City hospitals flipped the default on the menu, and you go from something like 1% of people ordering the plant-based options to like 60%, or I'm not entirely sure what the numbers are, but there's something on that magnitude.
Yeah.
And then you help shift the social norms as well, where it's like eating plant-based is more of the norm.
Right.
Yeah, we just chip away at this problem. So there are lots of things that give me hope. Those are a few. Those are a few.
Yeah, I agree. I think that default idea was really brilliant, and
Hmm.
yeah, and very very hopeful. It's great. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you for your work with Connect for Animals. We'll put a link in the show notes for sure so people can check it out, sign up for your list, and thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, of course. Hope, thank you so much for this delightful conversation, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat with you today. It's been really nice. So, and thank you for your work as well.
Thank you for listening to the Hope for the Animals podcast, a project of compassionate living. If you're listening on a podcast app, please scroll down to the ratings and give us 5 stars. That helps us to reach out to more people with this wonderful information. Would love to see some more reviews as well. If you're just listening from a website or you clicked on a social media post, if you can share this episode or any episode on your networks, that is so appreciated. I hope you're enjoying the changing of the seasons. This time of year has become my favorite time of year. I'm really looking forward to the leaves turning colors, the drippy, wonderful rain coming here in Oregon, and the chill in the air. I can't wait. Take a moment to enjoy it if you can, and live vegan.